NBN's promising to lift its broadband game, but is this a promise it can keep?
And why are financial influencers in hot water with ASIC?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. And we dive headfirst each and every week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined, diving in as always, by Mr. Adam Turner. Hey, Adam, in the past week, Heineken launched a new beer. And look, maybe there's nothing new with that, except that it's the first beer that you can only drink in the metaverse.
Oh, no.
What do you reckon a metaverse hangover is going to taste like?
Oh, burnt bologna and regret, I'd say. Please, they are taking the piss, though, aren't they? Like, they are just making fun of the metaverse. Please tell me they're taking the piss.
They are absolutely 100% taking the piss rather than, in this case,
continue to drink
it.
Heineken. Okay.
We're also joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by ZDNet's Chris Duckett. Hey, Chris, if you could have your choice of metaverse booze, what would it be?
Oh, God. Something that knocks me out straight away so I don't have to be in the metaverse anymore.
So the metaverse gargle blaster, basically.
Yeah, That's what I was trying to think of, yeah. Hitchhikers guide me out of that bad boy straight away.
Chris is here this week because there's just so much NBN news to cover that we could, in fact, dedicate the entire podcast to it. Before we do, we caught up with Finder's Angus Kidman to delve into the murky world of financial influencers, or, as they're commonly known, Finfluencers. Gus, I thought a Finfluencer was a shark.
I would have said so. I think Finfluencers should be entirely under the ocean in that respect. But, if there's one thing that social media has taught us, it's that there's no limit to how much we can mangle the English language.
True that.
So aside from mangling the English language, because usually when we think about influencers, you kind of get this visual picture of a fitness model promoting their wonderful lifestyle and a range of body creams and nutrients and stuff like that. Where do Finfluencers come into this picture?
Yeah, very much. That's the influencer model, and obviously we've seen Adam pursue that very successfully. But
I have the skin tone to speak for it. Thank you very much.
And the bikini body now too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess broadly, an influencer can exist in any area because people do go online to learn about everything these days. It's not just about fashion and beauty, and so this idea of a Finfluencer is just if most of your information is coming from hanging around on TikTok or hanging around on Instagram, it makes sense that people will talk about topics that impact their lives, and money is a big one. Finance is a big one. So you've seen the rise of people saying, hey, people are interested in learning about this topic and I'm going to have a crack at it. And that's really how I think we've ended up with the Finfluencer. There are people who are saying, hey, I'm interested in this topic. I'd like to talk about it. How am I going to reach people similar to me? And the answer is, it's not that I'm going to go out and start writing a blog because that's very 20 years ago. They're going to go out and say, right, I'm going onto TikTok. I'm going on Instagram. So it makes sense that any area you can talk about, you could have an influencer in that space.
And is it fair to assume that like most influencer groups, they can be sort of split into two categories: the ones who are fairly genuine and the ones who are dodgy?
Maybe
or
I
is
would
there a lot of grey area?
I would.
Isn't that humanity? Are we going a bit broad here?
I think so. I think what perhaps the useful division and the division that matters with influencers is you have a lot of people who'd like to be noticed, and a few people who have been noticed and who are successful and who are getting money thrown at them by big brands in order to reach their audience. And it's really in that space that we get worried. If you're saying you're a Finfluencer and you have 5 followers, ain't nobody gives a damn. But if you've got 10,000 people listening to what you're saying, that's likely to mean that you're getting money thrown at you. And it's when you're getting money thrown at you that things start to get murky. And that's when the regulators start to take interest.
And that's been the big story this week with ASIC actually starting to crack down and starting to put out information for how financial influencers should operate, but also how brands should work with financial influencers to make sure they're not running foul of the law, yeah?
Exactly. So we've had ASIC come out and make a statement. Now, we need to be clear about the way that the regulator, like ASIC, works in Australia. Like, it's fair to say that they're very rarely at the forefront of when trends happen. By the time ASIC gets around to noticing something, it often has got out to sort of a fairly messy kind of situation. But it's also fair to say they always start by saying, hey, this is what you should do. And they take a little bit longer before they sue a lot of people. So we're in the, hey, this is what you should do. We'd like to educate you. We'd like to make sure that influencers are doing the right thing in terms of how they talk about financial products. And at the moment, we're saying, hey, here's some guidelines, you should follow them. If the guidelines aren't followed, then we can expect probably sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, there'll be a big headline case where they either go after an influencer or after the brand that sponsored them or both and say, hey, here's an example for the rest of you to follow. This is pretty routine for ASIC. So we've seen it happen in other areas. It's just that now they've decided that the Finfluencers are the next area that we need to educate people about.
And this is a space where those brands, those mediums, are predominantly seen as younger mediums, that they skew younger. Is that true also for the kind of the appeal of financial influencers, do you think?
Yes, I think because the audience on these platforms is young across the board, pretty much. And I think ASIC had some of its own research that showed that a large percentage of people under the age of 25 had actually followed at least one influencer. So like there's an audience there. And I think the ASIC desires to say, well, we have to reach these people in that space because they're probably never going to see the areas ASIC's looked at in the past, like the terrible ads for funeral insurance that you see on Foxtel. Like that's just a different demographic.
It's a different kind of financial advice, I guess. So, what are dodgy financial influencers actually doing? I mean, is this just your buy penny stocks kind of thing, or is it more sophisticated than that?
Um, I think you could find the range of them on there. The thing that ASIC really wants to crack down on, like the thing that is trying to point out to influencers, which I genuinely think a lot of them wouldn't realize, a lot of people wouldn't realize, is that the rules are different when you're talking about financial products than when you're talking about other stuff. Influencers are used to the idea that, hey, we might have an affiliate code, a promo code that says, hey, if you sign up and buy Adam's Amazing Skin Cream online, using this code, you'll get a discount. They get a cut of that. Like, we're familiar with that model. We've seen that going on everywhere. You can't just do that with a financial product. With a financial product, if you're going to do that, if you're going to have a kind of paid affiliate link coming in, you have to have a financial services license or be associated with somebody who does. And that's just a requirement that I think most influencers wouldn't think about. They might be aware that, oh, I need to put a promoted thing on here if I've got a sponsor, but they wouldn't think about that distinction. And a lot of what ASIC is saying is just, hey, you guys should be aware that if you're going to do that kind of partnership, you do need this kind of license, and you might not have realized.
And how high is the bar set? How hard is it to get one of those licenses?
It's not hugely straightforward. It's certainly not just fill out a form and you've got one. In many cases, what you'll do is you actually associate yourself with someone who already has a financial services license and become a sub licensee. That's quite a common model, but it's certainly the case that if you're trying to promote those things, you'll need that license, and it's not trivial to get it. So you're going to want to be confident that you have an ongoing business here if you're going to go through the hoops that are involved with getting that. It's not a simple fill out this form and you're done kind of prospect at all.
Well, speaking of things that are complex, is there a simple definition of what a financial service is? Because I can imagine that's something that people might trip up on as well, thinking, oh, this is, is a bank a financial services, a stocks financial services, is crypto a financial service? Does ASIC have anything to make that clear?
It does, but not crystal clear. So broadly speaking, any credit cards are definitely a financial product. Savings accounts are definitely a financial product. Stock exchange services. So if you're buying stocks through an online app, those are definitely a financial service. Crypto is a complicated one, which I think we'll discuss in more detail in a bit, but it might be a financial service and it might not. I think if you're a sensible influencer or a sensible person writing in this space at all, you go, if it's something that people could be putting their money into and there's a risk of loss, you should treat it like a financial service, even if under the very strict ASIC definition you don't need to. That's the sensible, ethical, editorial way to go around it. But the ASIC definitions are stricter in terms of what's tied in. There are other things you'd think of as like financial products. Insurance is the big example here, where you need a different kind of license. A financial services license doesn't actually cut it either. So there's a lot of potential different things in this space, but it become a simpler way of thinking about it is that if it's a product that involves money and that influencer is getting paid either a sum to talk about it or is getting a percentage of clicks on everyone who goes through, they are probably going to need to be licensed in some way. And that's really the awareness that I think ASIC's trying to drive, that if you're specifically talking about those kinds of things, then you could get into trouble. Other thing you can get into trouble for that they call that is if you say, oh, this is a guaranteed way to make money. You can't lose on this investment. This has got no risk. if you make statements like that, they're going to come after you because there is nothing sitting in the investment space that comes with no risk. And anyone writing about that stuff in any way, links or not, has to be clear that there are pros and cons in nearly all of these things.
But if we learnt one thing from the Banking Royal Commission and the investigation of the dodgy financial advisors, is having a license is no guarantee that you're not a dodgy bastard, is it?
No, it's look, it's a barrier you need to leap over, but it sure ain't the only barrier that you would
Yeah.
need to leap over. And similarly from that too, you can go, even when there's an investigation, even when there's a massive royal commission and heaps of findings, it takes a long time to fix these things up. So I don't think we should kid ourselves that having these regulations in place means that people will not get done in here, because it absolutely will happen. And I think it's interesting that this happened like literally within the same week that we also had the ACCC going after Facebook and saying, right, you've got to stop running these dodgy advertisements featuring celebrities. And those were for what we can at least say were pseudo financial products. They were for crypto things that turned out to be scams. But I think there's a little bit of regulatory awareness across the board. We've got to try and have a go at this. But yeah, and I think we would be fooling ourselves if we thought, oh, well, as long as you've got an FSL, you're going to be compliant. And that every single person who's a Finfluencer is going to get monitored for this. There'll be selective monitoring, there'll be a couple of court cases, but it's still going to be up to the consumer to be really careful about what they do at the end of the day, because regulation is not going to be the total solution for this problem.
I would have said with those kind of, what were they? I think Dick Smith and David Koch and a few other like fake ads. They were not affiliated with them. I should be clear here. But I would have said with those, they were kind of brutally obvious that they were dodgy, or at least they were brutally obvious to me. I suppose people's perceptions vary. With a financial influencer, though, do you think there needs to be more transparency around their operations? You see this a lot with YouTube stuff. If someone's doing a paid promotion, they'll say, I'm going to stop talking about the 20 horror movies you should see because I need to tell you about VPNs or that kind of thing. It's really a clear break. Almost you're kind of going back decades, almost your cash for comment radio thing. Do you think we need that in that financial influencer or even just that broad online influencer space?
Yeah, I think we need it, but I think elements of it are there. So if you have any kind of paid promotion on YouTube, for example, you'd have to do that now. YouTube would require that if you were doing a channel saying, hey, here's 5 stocks I'm keeping an eye on. In the middle of it, you drop into a thing where you're going to start talking about eToro or whoever the example is. You'd already be required to do that by YouTube. YouTube's own guidelines around promotion are like that, and those are reinforced in some cases by state regulation. So those platforms have a role to play in that. But within that, if you're putting this stuff out in Australia and talking about Australian brands, then yes, you should also, you're likely to into the ultimate version. It's like, well, you're going to have your financial services license number either popping up at the end of your video or visible in your bio or things like this. Those regulations are not super clear yet, and they haven't really leaned into that level of detail. But in all these cases, you want to get to best practice. And I just think, the feeling is that no one was even aware that there was a best practice to be had in some of these spaces. And that's where ASIC is starting.
And around about now, I like to have a pot noodle.
It's a tasty little snack.
And if the listeners got that joke, then they're just as old as we are. But so I guess the other thing here is a financial influencer, and I guess it's coming across that we're saying this is all bad, this is all awful. But a financial influencer could theoretically give you quite sound financial advice if they know what they're talking about.
Well, yeah, to be clear, they'd have to say it's not financial advice. You should never say something is financial advice unless you are a registered financial advisor, and that's
This
something
podcast is not financial advice.
Absolutely. That's not enough to get, but you can certainly give useful information and good tips, and we shouldn't. Yeah, if people are consuming information in these spaces, saying, "Oh, that's a dumb place to get it," is not the answer. The answer is to try and ensure there are some good people on there doing that well. And absolutely, you can give useful explanatory information to saying, "Hey, this is how these things work." You can talk about this is what we've seen happen with this particular stock, but you have to be clear: it could go up, it could go down. Like you need to. There's a place to be found where these things can be done well. I don't think it's a case of going, well, you've just got to throw it all out and say it's not happening. But you do have to be careful, and it can get very murky. We'd already alluded to the fact that cryptocurrency is not considered to be a financial product in the strict sense by ASIC because it itself doesn't really hold any necessary monetary value. So if you get crypto and you convert it and you've made some money, the tax office will come after you. But ASIC doesn't think of that as a financial product. But crypto is not just the coins. There are lots of other things. There are derivatives and exchanges and things like that. Some of those would be financial products. So it becomes very murky in that case, which is again why I think the sensible way to approach is that, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then let's regulate it like a duck or act like it's regulated like a duck, even if that it turns out to be a robo duck.
Well, it's interesting that some of the crypto bros are like very much like these influencers, but some of the people behind the big crypto companies in Australia have been pushing for the industry to be regulated and this kind of stuff so they can be legitimized, so they can sort of weed out some of the cowboys. Um, do you think that that's going to happen more in that this will extend more into the crypto space as it tries to be seen more as a legit arm of finance?
Absolutely, and I mean, full disclosure, I work at Finder. That is very much the Finder point of view. That the more regulation in this space is a good thing because it gives consumers more confidence. It gives them, okay, we know this isn't just a fly by night thing, and there's things we can do if stuff goes wrong. We know there's an appetite for that. So yeah, I think that there will be a push to do that. At the same time, we're just going to continue down this path of generally technology advances a lot faster than regulation does, and we see this over and over again. There's not going to be any different in this space. So even if if the influencers get nicely sorted out, they'll have to work out, well, what will we do about crypto, which is not being regulated in that way currently. Something else will emerge that we haven't thought of, whatever the successor to TikTok is, and is going to become, the next thing that people have to work out. If we're all suddenly, learning stuff from, virtual digital carrier pigeons, we're going to have to sort that one out as well.
How big do you have to be? I'm just curious because this is getting a bit of media attention right now, and obviously, we may well be listened to by some finfluencers, but we're probably listened to by more people who listen to finfluencers who might think, well, hang on, does this mean that I can't go to Adam and say, hey, Adam, you really should buy some wonderful Alex coin? Will ASIC come after me for a one-on-one discussion like that? Is there a scale that we know of where they go, right, that's an influencer?
I imagine that when they start picking out examples, they will try and go for ones that are prominent because they want to go, there is a clear case to be made here that this was going to influence a lot of people and it could be problematic. I just think on a scale level, they're not going to go after a lot of individuals if they can't connect that to some clear evidence of harm. That's always going to be the ASIC threshold. And often their threshold is about saying, let's stop this person doing it. So often they will stop various advisors if they've done things that are not allowed. They'll say, right, this person's not allowed to do this for a fixed period of time. So it's not the case that they're going to come after every small thing. And it's not the case that you can't talk about finance issues and money much more generally. They're very concerned about when you're talking about specific products. So if you're giving sensible monetary advice of the stop buying 3 takeout coffees a day variety, that's
What?
never going to come under their radar.
That's bad?
Adam lives in Melbourne, remember?
In Melbourne, he can only afford 2.5 takeout coffees, but the principle holds. That kind of information is not what's under the gun. What really is under the gun is the notion of saying, you must buy this stock and it's amazing, or you should use this exchange because it's the best ever, and not talking about how you're getting money out of it. Like, it really is about saying, if you want to be talking about these kinds of things, you need to have gone through these additional processes. And that's very much the message they're presenting. Is that part of a bigger discourse on how can we regulate these things better? Absolutely. And we're going to see other activity from places other than ASIC, or in terms of new laws, in terms of other things given to the consumer regulator. And that's good. I think it's good that some attention is getting paid to it because turning a blind eye to it was never going to be an option.
Well, as you say, ASIC kind of treads slowly, and I'm sure this is one that we'll be keeping an eye on in the months and years to come. Thanks so much for making time for the show this week, Gus.
Absolute pleasure.
And look, you're an old hand at the show. You know what's coming. The vertical hold 3 questions of doom. I'll ask all 3. You can answer them in any order you like. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current big contentious question du jour, what is your secret skill or talent, and why does it make you special?
So people can find my work online at finder.com.au. They can find me on Twitter at GusWorldAU. And secret power that I'm able to describe on a public podcast, I think I'll go for, if everyone's familiar with the game TV show Letters and Numbers, also known as Countdown in the UK, the numbers game on that thing, I can smash that. Like 90% of the time, numbers come up, I'll go, yeah, I've got that. Alex can confirm that this is
I was going to say,
true.
I'm not sure that counts as a secret because I knew that.
But absolutely, that is my secret power. And just obviously that's good. I don't need to justify that. That just is what it is. It's amazing. Bow down before me.
Very well. We shall bow down before you. Thanks so much for your time.
So, Chris, the federal government and NBN are set to spend a shed load of money to improve the network. What are they promising, and why are they promising it now?
Why are they promising it now? Well, two things. The government wants it as an election promise, uh, even though who in their right mind is going to oppose this thing? And secondly, the NBN wants it out the door before the caretaker provisions kick in, which is very important because you can't announce that you're upgrading the network in the middle of the election campaign because everyone loses their mind and screams political interference.
Yeah.
So what they announced this week was they were going to spend a total of 750 million to upgrade the fixed wireless network to make it 5G capable. As well as this, they were going to bring a whole bunch of satellite users onto the fixed wireless network. And basically, there's a chance that fixed wireless users could see speeds with 3 digits in them,
Ooh,
which is actually like this is
and no
really
decimal
good.
point in there.
Yeah, there's no decimal. There might be one after the 3 digits.
Yeah,
And obviously that obviously depends on how close you are to the tower because they're going to try to use millimeter wave 5G as much as possible. NBN's been doing a bunch of tests. They reckon they can get it out a few kilometers, but physics says that if you're 4 or 5 kilometers away, you're not going
that's
to get these ultra
very
high
ambitious
speeds.
for millimeter wave.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But NBN has got it at least out to a couple of Ks. But basically, this is a good thing. I mean, this is the first time that fixed wireless has seen a significant upgrade from when these plans were really first announced a decade ago. And I mean, usually I sit here and pour scorn over it, but this is actually a good thing. And poor people in regional Australia are actually going to get might. I'm going to say might because they, theoretically this is brilliant. In practice, well, we'll have to see how that comes.
But that's the nature of wireless broadband in a nutshell, isn't it? I mean, it's always going to be super variable. I was curious, actually, and I was going to ask you which 5G tech they were going after. Presumably, if they're going after millimeter wave, this means if you're an existing fixed wireless customer, then you're going to need a new receiver.
Yeah, presumably yes. But funnily enough, NBN has a lot of practice with this. For instance, having to replace modems that get struck by lightning in the Blue Mountains all the time. So they actually have a process that they've been using on that one where it's automatically sent out and all this sort of stuff. So this might be a lot smoother than we imagine it might go. Once again, that's a very big might. But yes, the customer equipment will have to be upgraded. NBN's reusing the same towers because basically anyone that's been following this has seen the sort of crazy stuff from certain parts of the nation where it's like you can't put that tower there because it will fry my sheep, give me COVID, or the brainworms are telling me
Fade the
don't do it.
curtains.
Yeah, yeah. Do not. Yeah. Well, you can use the tower, but not during daylight savings.
Yeah. And so, what does this mean? Is it just faster speeds for fixed wireless, or are they extending the footprint, or both?
So I think that's the important bit is that there's around about 100,000 or so satellite premises are being brought in.
Mm-hmm.
So basically that takes a little bit of the load off SkyMuster. So as well as the speeds, it's like getting people off that dang satellite as much as we can. However, if you did want quick speeds, I think you'd probably be giving that annoying billionaire some money instead of relying on NBN.
Well, the annoying billionaire actually this week, I think, announced that the prices on his annoying billionaire low Earth satellite service, which we talked about in a recent episode with a user, are going up as well. So you'd actually have to give him even more.
Yeah, and I mean, got a couple of mates who are on this, and the downlink is wonderful. It is definitely 3 digits. It's always the uplink with this stuff that's I think increasingly more and more this is the issue. NBN released some stats this week that they'd see 25% increase in upload data over the past year. So thinking you could probably get by on 5 or 10 megabits, it might not. Into the future, you're really going to find you might chug on that, and that's the problem with the space-based stuff. Is usually it's really good down, but then your uplink speed is kind of awful.
I guess one of the upsides here, of course, with more people getting shifted onto fixed wireless is that those who don't have the choice because of presumably remoteness will get a better satellite service. Maybe not great, but they might see some improvements.
Yeah, they're getting a quota upgrade once the fixed wireless network is upgraded. So satellite is just a blast from the past because the data's broken up into peak and off-peak.
Ooh.
So what NBN is doing is they basically extending off-peak out to 16 hours of the day. So basically everything but work hours is how best to think about it. And so that work hour quota is getting bumped up to 90 gig. Great, but you're going to get this at the end of 2023.
So it'll be a while. And I mean, the interesting thing that strikes me with all of this is it's great that this is coming because there are so many people, they simply don't really have that kind of choice. I feel like being a little bit cynical here, though, because all of the language still talks about, up to 100 meg, up to a capability of up to 250 meg, up to, of course, can mean one.
Yes. I mean, but this is the problem with your contended medium known as air, right? It's the same thing as when Telstra and Vodafone and Optus try to sell you 5G fixed wireless. This is just NBN getting in on the same game. It's just that NBN does have many, many more users than those telcos at the moment. And they've got to do it in the parts of the country where, you can't make money and it's not easy to do it. But with all this stuff, it's like, if it comes through the air, you're always playing with up to. Earlier this morning, New Zealand released some of their latest Sam Knows White Boxes stats. And there's a lovely little page in there on gaming latencies. And basically, if it's a fixed line, at least and I'm talking only in terms of latency, not in terms of throughput or anything like that. But in terms of latency, funnily enough, the old copper ADSL line isn't actually that far behind the gigabit fiber speed that you would imagine. Like it's in graph terms, you're like, oh, okay, but they point out obviously the ADSL will then just blow out its latency out the thing. But the worst technology is fixed wireless,
Mm.
and that's because it's not a piece of copper, it's a piece of air before it gets to the tower and then into the fiber down there.
All those bits have to run a very, very long way back and forth, basically.
Yes, and I mean that's the issue with these air things. I mean, there's a reason why
Wind resistance.
if you go to yeah. Has anyone looked at the aerodynamics of bits? But there's a reason why if you go to TPG or you go to Telstra and you say, I want to get 5G fixed home, there's an asterisk there that basically says not for gamers.
But at least they do that. At least they acknowledge that. Unlike there would have been a time when they wouldn't.
Oh yeah, I mean we're in a better place, but I mean depending on your needs, if you need low latency, then using something that's goes through the air is still not good for you.
Mm.
Well, you mentioned old copper technologies, and the other big bit of news in NBN land this week are the first fibre to the node upgrades finally available to order. We've been waiting for this for a long while, haven't we? Or it feels like it.
Well, we're finally here, right? NBN said they were going to do it in March, and what was it, 22 days out of 31? They got eventually just got in here. But look, 50,000 lucky premises, roughly, are able to be upgraded from today, or you can place your order anyway. The interesting bit, though, is you have to read this all very, very closely and actually make sure that if you are in one of these suburbs, that you can actually upgrade. Because at the same time that NBN said, here's the suburbs that can place orders, they also said, oh, and here's all this, basically, here's the backlog of all the other suburbs that we were going to try to announce in the past couple of years. And, here they are. And there are some suburbs in both lists. And that's because NBN uses the term parts of the suburb.
Mm.
So, like most things with the NBN, you're going to have to plug your address in. Just don't assume because you see the suburb you live in that is necessarily going to be down your street because you could be on a completely different node. But, it's good that people can actually do this stuff. NBN says they're going to try and get to a point of allowing 60,000 premise a month extra to place orders. So if we do this again in about 18 months, we can be probably talking about full fiber install horror stories probably.
You're still limited. I think we've mentioned this on the show before. You've got to order 100 meg or better. So it's still a fairly pricey prospect if you want it.
It is, and that's all driven, of course, by NBN's economics. But I mean, unless your line is a complete turkey, you should be able to get even the dreariest fiber to the node should be getting 20. If it can't get 25, NBN has to come in and fix it. That's
Yeah.
one. So the only question mark is over 50, and you should be able to do that. You'd think. Um, so it is pricey, but 100 megabits is low. It is a low enough threshold. I mean, they didn't put it up to something like 250, thank goodness.
There's also some limitations there on the ISPs though as well. This I found interesting.
Oh, oh, well, yeah. Some ISPs aren't on at the moment. A couple of big ones. Yeah, Optus and TPG, but NBN has said elsewhere that they'll eventually get on. And I mean, who? I mean, just ask yourself the question: what telco is going to maintain not being on this list, like for the coming years? It would
Mm.
really be shooting yourself in the foot to do this. So whatever issues they're working through at the moment, I expect they'll get on eventually.
And I guess the thing there as well is most NBN contracts, not all of them, but most of them are month to month anyway. If you desperately thought, I want to have this, my ISP's not offering it, you could jump to one of the ones that is providing it and even jump back if you felt like it, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no reason why you can't do this. Like, churning is meant to be a breeze, and I have 12 asterisks after meant, by the way.
Yeah.
But churning's meant to be a breeze. So yeah, that's what I mean. Like, if a ISP doesn't want to get in this game, then they are just going to end up leaking users that do want to do it. So
Now,
they can make their economic decisions.
I remember certain politicians telling me that the NBN rollout was complete. Now, some people could turn around and say this is a huge backflip, but they've always sort of indicated this was going to happen. So is it a backflip or a side flip? How would you phrase it?
I believe I was actually quoted at the press club to Fletcher of calling this a backflip.
Yeah.
So that's my terminology. Because basically the Liberals spent better part of a decade saying that the copper was going to carry everything we needed.
Mm.
And people like myself spent years just going, look, at some point,
Us goose, all
yeah,
selves.
yeah. But it's like, just tell us you're going to upgrade it afterwards,
Yeah.
right? Like, don't run around with your hair on fire screaming about economics if you know that you're going to have to come back and upload it. So, yes, it's a backflip based on their own rhetoric. If
Mm.
they'd come out at the start and said, we're going to do fiber to the node to get everyone onto a better baseline than ADSL, and then open it up to on demand upgrades, that would have been a pretty hard thing to knock down.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They basically shot themselves repeatedly in the foot just to screw Labor and Conroy. And, we've had to go through years and years of basically mess just for stupid rhetoric.
But they have been saying for a while this was going to happen. It's not like they announced this yesterday and no one ever knew they were going to expand that fiber footprint. It has been on the cards
Well,
for a while, hasn't it?
yeah, but they were talking out of both sides of their mouth. So at the same time, they would say, "Oh, yeah, oh, look, we're thinking about upgrades." At the same time, you would then listen to them in Senate estimates go, "Oh no, we're good. Can we point out how much a Labor full fiber plan would have costed and all this sort of
Yeah.
like just nonsense." We did this based on this number, which involved stopping the NBN and reverting all the way back to full fiber, not taking the NBN as it was and then going out to full. Anyway, the point is that yeah, they were flagging it, but at the same time, they were still carrying on with the same ridiculous crap they've done for years. It was basically, it was just unnecessary in
Mm.
my view. They could have just said, "We're going to do upgrades. Hold tight. We'll get you to 2550." And it would have neutralized the issue, frankly.
There's plenty of, you mentioned fiber upgrade horror stories that we might come to in 18 months before. There's plenty of horror stories of people on fiber to the node having awful kind of connections. Is there any indication that these, 50,000 homes and premises are actually in those hardest hit locations? Have they actually done a bit of damage control here? Do we know?
I would have to look at the map. I have not done this, so this is all just feelings. So brace yourself. But I would suspect that if you were in the sort of geography that is called basalt, I don't know if you'd be on here at the moment. When I was going through the list, I noticed there was a lot around, say, Newcastle and stuff like that, and that's just pretty sandy, just easy to do sort of stuff. Um, But you've also got to remember, this isn't the absolute entire FTDN footprint. This is about 75%. So there's still going to be legacy fiber to the node customers there. And then you're still going to have, as I keep saying every time we discuss this, you're still going to have fiber to the basement people who are still on copper.
What about fiber to the curb? What's the fastest plans you can get on that at the moment?
That would depend. That I mean, much like fiber to the node, it depends how good your line is. But
Yeah.
that I think we can read into that something when NBN says that they're going to upgrade you to full fiber if you order 250 or over. So you can easily get 100 on it. NBN said for a long time that they thought that they could get people at 250 or like sort of around about 300 on fiber to the curb, but basically they decided they were just going to bid in the whole thing. So I think they're basically making it easy. They're not trying to basically push the envelope for a
So fiber
rhetorical.
to the curb was the thing they did because they didn't want to do fiber to the premises, and they went, "Oh, screw it! All right, we'll do more fiber to the premises anyway." Now fiber to the curb's on the back burner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, it was basically we want to do fiber to the curb because we don't want to keep tearing up grandma's garden because that's where your labor costs are with full fiber.
Hmm.
But then they found out that when it rains, it is still a bit iffy, and lightning hates it. And it turns out Australia keeps having worse storms for some
Some
reason
reason.
related to decades of burning. I hear, but I'm not sure. I don't know anything about that.
Chris is not a scientist. But I mean, people we've already talked about satellite alternatives. The ACCC recently came out and said though, if you're on an NBN alternative, you're not necessarily doing any better, are you?
Oh, no, no. I mean, talking of horror stories, I mean, I do hear stuff about people that buy or live in, say, apartment blocks that are hooked up to the likes of Opticom, and a long time ago I used to hear them about TPG, but I don't hear them too much anymore. But basically, yeah, if you're on these networks, it's not bad, but you're not. But something like a rare turn up for the books, NBN is doing better on the speeds than if you're on these NBN alternatives they build when they build a new block of units or sometimes private estates and all that sort of stuff. It's not too bad. They're just trailing behind. But interesting thing in the report was that their number for the number of outages was completely blown out because there was basically two apartments in there who somehow had gone to the trouble of getting a Sam Knows white box in there, but not having their line fixed. So these two lines were constantly doing outages. And maybe it was the people in there trying to prove a point to the strata or their landlord or something. Which, if so, more power to you. That's a great way. But yeah, it's basically you can kind of just go they're about 90% of what NBN's sort of doing as a safe statement. I feel.
But we also saw, even if you are with some of the traditional telcos, that they are being forced to cough up some money because they weren't offering what they said they'd offer.
Oh, heaven forbid. Yeah, we're seeing this play out. So last year, Telstra got pinned for having to do refunds because selling people, particularly in fiber to the node, 100 megabit plans they weren't able to get, and basically not turning around to them and saying, well, you can get 70. Are you happy with 70 or do you want to go back to 50? So Telstra got done last year, but now we've seen that Optus and TPG collectively have had to refund $6 million. This is one of the good times that ACCC has run around with their stick and beat the telcos when it comes to NBN. So, yeah, I mean, basically, it's the telcos were meant to do this. They didn't. Now they're having to refund the money. Good.
I mean, this doesn't feel like a news story. I'm sure we've talked about this, maybe a dozen times of
Oh,
this telco's been busted for false speed advertising.
yeah.
Why? I guess the answer is money, but why do they keep doing it and why do they not just fix it up to avoid what's presumably refund plus fine?
I didn't realize we were going into the human nature philosophy section of the show. I haven't actually prepared with my textbooks for that one, but people are jerks, and it turns out telcos are run by people. And it does feel like every time we get a new technology, it's like, okay, how can we do this to get more money out of them without being caught?
How can we make the same mistakes that we made on every other technology?
See, I think there's your problem, Adam. You think it's a mistake.
It's true.
It's a strategy.
It's a strategy.
Yeah,
You're right.
Yeah, because they got that money. They had it swilling around their bank account gaining interest, and now they're having to refund it, right? So, I mean, some sales pig got a new car out of it because he hit his goals. Who's it's a victimless crime, right? Yeah, look, I mean, we should really just hire some AI to rewrite this part for us every time, hey?
I'm not looking forward to being replaced on this podcast by a robot, but it's probably true.
Yeah, well, I mean, at some point it's going to go, oh, sorry, Alex, you look like you're in trouble. Would you like some help with blah?
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Chris for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be back here, gentlemen.
And you're an old hand at the show, as Gus was before. You know what you're about to be hit with, the Vertical Hold 3 questions o' doom. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current big contentious question, what's your secret skill or ability, and why does it make you special?
I don't know if it makes me special. In fact, I think it backfires. But it's definitely being able to snark the shit out of everything on a moment's notice.
It's called just being a journalist, sir.
I mean, listeners to this show might have picked that up before, but you got to be able to look at something and just go, "That's a pile of shit." So that's me. If
so
you
not
want
diplomacy, then.
Well, referring to the board game, I lost the game recently because I refused to stop basically shitposting everyone, even though I was smashing them on the board. Turns out, let's get big mouth is a pretty good strategy. But if you want to find me, I write at ZDNet.com and find my name if you want to track me down on the socials. But, I'm a guy who hides behind a guillotine and an avatar of a dog online. So, yeah.
On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, via the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or at verticalhold.com.au.
And thanks everyone for dropping by. Remember, if you're stuck on the slow connections, try banging the rocks together. We'll get to you eventually. Leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice and help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.